Okay, hello everybody, and welcome to our webinar on supporting students experiencing homelessness through hotel motel stays. We're really excited that you're able to join us today. We have a lovely panel for you all, but we're just going to get started with a couple of housekeeping slides. And in the meantime, if you want to just say hello in the chat, let us know where you're joining us from. We'd love to hear that as well. Okay, just a couple of housekeeping things. This webinar should last an hour. If you have questions throughout the webinar, please send them in, but we just ask that you send it in the Q&A panel in your controls box, just because in the chat they'll get lost. So please make sure to submit them in the Q&A panel. This session is being recorded and you will be issued a certificate of attendance after today's session. And if you haven't already joined our SchoolHouse Connection community on Slack, we really encourage that you do, because if you have any questions after today, we encourage you to continue the conversation there. And just want to do a little introduction about SchoolHouse Connection for folks who may not be familiar with us. We are a national organization that works to overcome homelessness through education. We provide strategic advocacy and practical assistance in partnership with a variety of folks in the field. We have a website with a variety of resources, including information on our federal and state policy advocacy, Q&A from our inbox, webinar and implementation tools, some of which we will actually discuss today, and a youth leadership and scholarship program where we not only support our young scholars with financial support, but also with case management. And we're still accepting applications for that scholarship program, so we encourage you all to check it out and share it with your networks. And before we kind of get into our panel discussion today, just want to do a couple of slides to talk through the U.S. Department of Education's Dear Colleague letter that was published in September of 2023. The letter specifically asks states to expedite funding, including by modifying administrative procedures. So we ask that if you haven't already looked at this resource, that you take a look at it and share that language with your superintendents, school business officers, and really any other folks who are involved in spending decisions. We know that we're getting really close to those federal deadlines to spend American Rescue Plan homeless children and youth funds, so we encourage you all to share that widely. We do have a 2-page overview of some allowable uses that were clarified by the Dear Colleague letter available on our website. So again, encourage you all to check that out as well. I want to highlight just a couple of things that were clarified as allowable uses of ARP-HCY funds in the Dear Colleague letter. The first is providing food assistance if reasonable and necessary, and if there are no other sources to do so. The other one is providing early childhood education to young children aged birth through 5 who are not formally enrolled in the LEA, but are experiencing homelessness in the LEA. So this includes all kinds of activities, including eligibility, doing different activities to determine eligibility for childcare subsidies or other early learning programs. So just something to keep in mind as you're thinking about spending down those ARP-HCY funds. And the last thing that I want to cover here is just many activities to support college and career readiness, as well as the smooth transition to higher education are allowable uses of ARP-HCY funds. So anything from supporting parents and students with the completion of the FAFSA to paying for stipends to counselors to conduct transcript audits are allowable uses. Something that we're really excited about is the Dear Colleague letter did specifically mention the purchase of vehicles as an allowable use of ARP-HCY funds, including reimbursing parents and youth for gas costs through prepaid gas cards and limited car repairs. We, a couple of weeks ago, hosted a webinar where we had some lovely panelists talk to us about how they were able to purchase vehicles in their districts. And we thought it was just a really great source of information. So we developed a 2-pager that just has the key benefits and some considerations if this is something you're interested in doing. So again, highly recommend that you check that out if you haven't already. Okay, and hold on. Let me just go back really quickly. The last slide that I want to cover is just hotel motel stay. So what we're here to discuss today, it is reasonable and necessary. When it is reasonable and necessary, they may be used, ARP-HCY funds may be used to spend them. And the other thing that I want to just cover is that we do have on our website available a variety of practical resources that you can download and adjust for the needs of your district. So we know this is going to be a really challenging process, so want to make you aware of those resources as well. Okay. And I have talked to you a little bit, so we want to hear from you all to get a sense of who's in the room with us. Are you all already providing any hotel motel stays? And I'm going to go ahead and launch this poll. So let us know where you stand on this. Okay. There are a lot of folks joining us, so I'm going to give it another couple seconds. Okay, about 70% complete, so okay, great. I'm going to go ahead and end the poll. Okay, so it looks like most folks are providing hotel motel stays for youth and families, so that is great. And then there's a smaller percentage that is not or is interested, but is not yet. So you all are in the right place. Okay. And then we're just going to launch another quick poll. Just want to get a sense. We at SchoolHouse Connection really want to make sure that whatever TA we're providing is beneficial to you all. And we would be interested in knowing if office hours, open office hours, or you can talk to your peers around how you're planning for spending that last amount of ARP-HCY funds would be helpful to you. My poll is stuck, so give me one quick second while I pull it out. Okay, so let us know on a scale of 0 to 5, 0 being that will not be useful, and 5 being it would be the most useful thing, how you feel about if we were to host some open office hours for you all. Okay, I'm seeing about 60% participation, so give some time for a couple more folks. Okay, looks like we're go ahead and share results. And it looks like most of you would be interested in some office hours. So that is great. Thank you so much for sharing that feedback with us. Okay, and with that, I am going to go ahead and turn it over. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and just turn it over to Karen to introduce our panelists.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I am Karen Rice. I work on our K-12 team at SchoolHouse Connection, and I am so happy today to be joined by two really amazing people who are going to share their expertise and their experience with us. So joining us today on our panel of experts here is Susie Terry from the San Diego County Office of Education in California and Jen Saunders from Milton Town School District in Vermont. So welcome to you both. Thank you so much for being here. So Susie, if it's okay, we'll start with you. Wondering if you can tell us about your region that you work in, location, size, the number of students that you identify, and then any information you can share about how you identify students.
Sure. So I am a liaison for the County Office of Education. I know most states don't operate a county office model, but my role as homeless liaison for the county is to support all the school district and charter school liaisons within San Diego County. San Diego is the second largest county in California, so we have 43 school districts and over 100 charter schools. So all of those homeless liaisons are part of what I do in supporting. For the last, I want to say 3 years, our total number of students experiencing homelessness that have been identified in this county has hovered consistently around 20,000. So that's a countywide number. We have in California, as part of a state law that was passed, a mandatory housing questionnaire. The housing questionnaire goes to all pupils within a district or a charter school and has filled out its the housing questionnaire sort of follows verifying living situation based on the McKinney-Vento definition. And so that has, rather than, I don't know about other states, but in San Diego, previous to the housing questionnaire, we would have families mostly fill out the form once somebody in the office or somebody doing enrollment notice that, like, oh, they don't have an address they can give, or they don't, or they've given off some like indication that they may be in a unstably housed situation, and then the form would be presented to them. And so the major change is now every student's family fills out the form, and that has increased identification dramatically in our state. Anecdotally, I've had some school districts that have told me their homeless numbers almost doubled when they started using the housing questionnaire, because they were really catching a lot of families that otherwise like never really had the question presented to them. So that's a big part of how we do identification in San Diego County. We also do trainings. I have a countywide identification training that I offer to any school site personnel in San Diego County twice a year. We do the public notice here, and a lot of the other sort of strategies that have been used. I think the biggest one that's different is our mandated housing questionnaire.
Thanks, Susie. Jen, I will pass it over to you for the same question. If you can tell us about your district and what your numbers look like, and just a little bit about where you're at.
Great. So I am from Vermont, which is probably the size of San Diego County. And so I'm one single district town in Vermont. It's fairly rural. We have approximately 10,000 people total in our town. So as a single district, I'm the homeless liaison for 3 schools, and that total is around 1,500 students total. And of that, I have 57 homeless students in last year. You know, we do similar things in terms of identification. That's really been, I think, the efforts to identify have increased significantly in the last couple of years. We do a mandatory training for all faculty and staff as part of their back to school training, along with, you know, the other requirements. We hang flyers in public places around town that, you know, homeless families might be using, such as laundromats, the grocery store. There's a healthcare clinic in town that a lot of people go to. I personally collaborate closely with all of our school counselors, our administrators, our childcare partners, you know, people who know students best, and really have encouraged the fact that making a referral is the responsibility of everyone in our school community, and really streamline that process as well. So it's very clear what to do, how to do it. You know, I'm trying to take the burden off faculty or staff members who have a suspicion but might not be sure, and, you know, just really easing that process for them. I've also increased communication to families about their rights via, you know, a couple of times a year posting in our school newsletters, making sure people understand, families understand, and have clear communication about what homeless might mean under the McKinney-Vento law versus the HUD definition. Here in our area, the majority of our families are in a doubled up situation. We don't have any hotels in our town. So, you know, to be in a hotel or a shelter is out of this district. And so, you know, while we do have a fair amount of that, we have a lot of students doubled up. I also ask for every new student enrollment, I ask the housing questionnaire questions. And then also last year we started by going out to all families with that questionnaire as part of their, you know, back to school packet of information, where we're collecting directory information and whatnot, have gone out to all returning students with that. So, essentially it's very different because it's a more personal approach than what Susie was describing because we are such a small community, but it's the same steps. It's just on a different scale.
Thanks, Jen. Susie, I'll toss it over to you for the next question. But before I ask the next question, I do want to remind people that we would love to answer your questions as well. So I see a couple of them coming in through the Q&A panel. Please continue to submit those, and we will have time for Susie and Jen to answer questions as well. So keep those coming in. But Susie, I'll turn to you for the next question. What are the needs that you've seen among your students experiencing homelessness?
Well, again, I don't work directly with students, but I get requests for assistance and help. I do a lot of technical assistance in San Diego. And I think what I hear the most from liaisons in my county is housing, like, calling and asking for housing resources, for resources that they can refer families to aside from all of the school supports and entitlements that they kind of feel like they have handled. It's sort of that outside of school support that becomes hard to find, especially when I think San Diego is probably not unlike most places in this country. The demand for those resources far exceeds the supply of those resources. So I get a lot of housing questions, and probably second to that would be transportation related questions. Those are probably the two most common that I get.
Thanks, Susie. Jen, I'll toss it over to you for the same question.
Great. As I was just saying, a lot of our families are living out of district, so transportation is a significant need for us. And since COVID, really a lot of the more basic needs for food, clothing, hygiene supplies, school supplies. We have many requests for students who want to participate in extracurriculars, but are having trouble paying for the expenses of, football cleats or whatever those things are. So we've had a number of requests for that. Winter gear is a big one here. Kids grow fast and every year they need new, whatever it is, snow pants, coat, jackets, everybody loses mittens. So I have a running supply of those sorts of just basic needs. The other thing that we've really tried to focus on is a student's sense of belonging and enrichment. So within our schools, that's something that we're doing for all students, but the focus with all of the grant money that I've been using is really to try to give students experiencing homelessness a similar experience in school. If everybody's got a new metal water bottle, then those are the kinds of water bottles I buy, is the new metal water bottle, so they're feeling like like other students are. So that's a big need. I think just that sense of being part of their community. And then, the emergency housing, it is something that we've been facing. So, all of the things that you would think, those needs are all coming up, but it's been surprising the number of requests for food assistance. I would say that's one of the really big ones for us.
Thanks, Jen. I'll actually stay with you for the next question. You can
Sure.
kind of segue into how are you using your ARP-HCY funds to meet the needs that you just talked about? What can you share about kind of the process to determine that and the process to get that spending approved?
Sure. So it sort of starts out with me sort of taking a poll of the people that I work with in the schools. Do they have any families with specific needs? Are there any kids that they know of that need anything specific for back to school, for participation in extracurriculars? So I sort of try to cover the basics first, talk about food insecurity. And so I gather my list of needs from within the community of educators who are most connected with students. I also ask every new family that comes on my caseload, I have a needs assessment, and I go through the list of things that they might be facing for needs. We also we used our ESSER money to fund a grant manager for the first time. And so I worked very closely with that person during the 22-23 school year to make sure that I was maximizing the dollars that were available to us. Our approval process for the budgeted amount, I work directly with the superintendent. I actually report to her, and I work in the same building as our district or as our business office. So there's a high level of collaboration there around turning what the need is into an actual solution that can use some of these grant dollars. In Vermont, we also have a great state coordinator who helps us a lot as, you know, a community know what is an allowable resource, or sorry, an allowable expense, and kind of even helps us with writing of the grants if we need to, you know, not word for word, but it's a very collaborative approach. You know, internally, it's been honestly, for me, fairly easy to get the approval for spending the funds based on what I identify as a need. I'm not really asked to jump through a lot of hoops within our district in terms of who's managing the purse strings. So it's been relatively easy as to our internal process. You know, some of the challenges here really have been around finding vendors to provide transportation, because public transportation we don't have that in our town. So we are having to use taxi services. And so there's a lot of, you know, we've done the work already, so it wasn't so much an issue recently, but to get drivers to go through our background check process, to be, you know, so that families are comfortable sending their littles into a taxi cab with someone that they don't know. So those are some challenges that we've faced along the way and overcome. You know, we've used ESSER money, ARP money for transportation. Like I said, we used indirect costs from all of our grants to hire that grant manager position. We also used ESSER funds, ARP-HCY 1, to hire a part-time assistant to this program. And that person was really instrumental in helping streamline our process, building that needs assessment, like I had talked about, you know, updating some of our communication materials, updating our website. So a lot of the things that I wished that I had time to do, but because we're a small district, you know, I wear multiple hats. So it was really important to have somebody come in and just help shore up the program as our numbers increased. Yeah, and so as far as emergency housing goes, do you want me to speak specifically to that now as well? The biggest challenge, I think, around funding emergency housing is that it's on an emergent basis. So in a school district, or in Vermont anyway, we have a PO process that's really strict around the timing of when you can make a request for money, how long it's going to take to get that paid. And we don't have arrangements with hotels in Vermont. And during the whole, you know, COVID situation, a lot of the hotels were kind of taken over by the state to provide housing, and they were full. So even though we had money to spend, it was hard sometimes to find people a place to stay. And, you know, I had to work personally with the front desk at those hotels who required a credit card. So a lot of times, you know, I had to use my own credit card to hold the room and then sort of convince them to wait for payment. So that was very challenging, I would say. But again, that was not an internal concern or an internal problem. It was really working with the vendors that became difficult in our area. So I think I'll stop there for now. I mean, I'm sure I could go on and on, but if you have questions, happy to answer them along the way.
Thanks, Jen. Susie, I'll turn it over to you for the same question. How are you using your ARP-HCY funds to meet the needs that you are seeing and hearing about? And can you kind of share the process of how you went through that and getting it approved?
Sure. So one of the one of the things that I was able to do with ARP-HCY funds is add a staff person to my office, which was really amazing because I've been, a unit of one for many, many years, doing this work in San Diego County. So like Jen, I had always had a long wish list of things I wished I had time to do. And by adding the staff person, I was able to have her begin a shelter outreach program, which was beneficial and really kind of speaks to the identification, some of the identification that we do here in San Diego County. So she goes out on a monthly basis to shelters around the county in collaboration with the local liaison for wherever that shelter happens to sit. We have one large district in San Diego County. Most of them are within the boundaries of that district. And so it's a collaboration that we do mostly with them. We were able to get shelter staff trained. There was a lot of misunderstanding over the years that I had run into with either with disputes or families upset with schools about something a shelter staff had told them that they, were entitled to or had a right to, that was like a misunderstanding of what schools actually do and do not have to do. So it was nice to be able to have the capacity to get shelter staff trained so that there's less misinformation out there. And then they meet with families every time they go. And most of the shelters are 28-day or 30-day shelters. So each month they're seeing new families when they go, and they every month identify families that did not know they could still have their kids in school while they were living in a shelter. So they're the district liaison, if they're going to attend the local school, is able to do an enrollment on the spot while they're there. And if they want to remain in their school of origin, my staff person then is able to facilitate that with whichever district needs to be reached out to facilitate that. So that's one thing that I've been really happy that we've been able to do with our ARP money. And then the other big thing is the short-term hotel stay program that I was able to do also kind of because I had another staff person to help oversee it. So our short-term hotel stay program happened because, like I mentioned previously, liaisons in my county will reach out to me when they need something or they don't know, and I had experienced over the years liaisons who would call me with I have a family, they're in my office right now and they have nowhere to go tonight. Do you have any resources? And so I was thinking about that when I chose to start up the hotel stay program. And I reached out to, because of all of the things that Jen mentioned, the PO processes and credit card requirements and things like that, that I just didn't feel were that workable for me. I reached out to a community organization in San Diego County that had an existing hotel program that they did for transition age youth, and asked them if they felt like getting into the family homelessness game and letting me sort of jump on their program. The reason I did that was they had an existing contract with all the Motel 6s and Studio 6s in San Diego County, and their contract allowed for a fast turnaround. So when we get a referral, I send it over to our community partner. They log into the computer and make the reservation themselves, and we can have people checking into the hotel the next day. So we've been able to do all very quick, next day service for people. And it's also low barrier because of their contract. There's no credit card required. Our families don't have to have a credit card. They just have to have a government issued ID to prove who they are. in order to check in. And so that's been really helpful. I did very seriously underestimate the need for short-term hotel stays in my county. I was sort of basing it on like my experience of people asking me about it. And I thought that we would be doing like a handful of families a week, maybe like 10 to 15 a month. And we get probably 10 referrals a day for this program. So I very seriously underestimated the need in my county, which is a good and a bad thing. Obviously, it's not good that there are so many families in need, but it was very good for me to realize, to have that sort of need revealed to me about what's going on in my county that I was previously unaware of. But I also had severely underfunded the contract because I contracted with our community provider for what I thought, for an amount of money that I thought would last an entire year. And it was gone in like just less than 3 months. So I had to do a lot of moving things around on my budget and like creating ways to get additional of my ARP funds into that budget. Which was fine, but I also started getting calls from, so my hotel stay program the referral can come from any McKinney-Vento liaison in my county. But some of my McKinney-Vento liaisons were asking me like, how did you get this done? Because we have a lot of our own ARP funds that we would like to be able to spend on hotel stays for our families, but they run into sort of the same problems with like a PO process and how to get it done. So I created an MOU that LEAs in my county could sign on to that would just allow me to still run all the referrals through my program. And then I invoice them for their stays if they want to use their own ARP funds for the hotel stay. And that allowed us to serve a lot more families. Like a lot of my big districts that got large sums of ARP money are paying for their own hotel stays through my program. And that allows me then to serve more of the smaller districts and charter schools that don't have the size of ARP funds that it takes to run a hotel program. I will say it's very expensive. It's a lot more expensive than I anticipated. And I know I've talked with other districts that have contracts with like a Motel 6 or a hotel chain that have set a flat rate. In San Diego County, we don't have a flat rate written into the contract with the hotel provider. So we're also impacted by, I don't know, most people are familiar with the fact that San Diego has a large Comic-Con event every year, and then we're paying like 3 times the rate for a hotel per night. And so there's different things like that that impact, that make it hard to plan financially. But the other thing we do that I think is important is we made sure that any family that gets referred into the program, then we reach out to them. My staff person reaches out to them about like, we make sure their liaison, is aware if they're getting transportation. We only allow hotel stays in the neighborhood where the students are going to school. So sometimes we've had families, I think like Jen mentioned, San Diego is the size of most states. So if you're attending school in one part of the county and you're requesting a hotel 40 miles away in another part of the county, we won't agree to do that. We will only use hotels near where your child is attending school. And the idea is to, again, make it easier to sustain school attendance while families are going through these transitions. And then we worked with the San Diego County Office of Homeless Solutions to be able to submit referrals to them for families that need housing navigation, case management services. And again, these families, many of them were invisible to me. I can guarantee you they were invisible to a lot of the homeless response system in San Diego County. So by taking a hotel stay from us that's being paid for by a third party makes them eligible for more services within the homeless response system. And we've had families that have literally like cried because they're so happy that they're going to get a case manager that's going to help them through this process. So that part's been really, really satisfying. But the managing the costs and the contracts and everything it takes to get this done is definitely a large lift for folks.
Susie, can you talk about, there's been a number of questions coming in the Q&A panel. So wondering if you can just kind of give us a picture of what the stays look like for families in terms of the number of days. So I do want to just reiterate that we shared at the beginning that the guidance in the new Dear Colleague letter says that stays can be longer than 3 days as long as it's reasonable and necessary. And we want to make sure that we are allowing our children and youth to attend school. So just want to remind that that's the language from the Dear Colleague letter. But then Susie, if you can talk about kind of how you've navigated the number of days and how that looks for you.
Yeah, so I don't want to get anybody in trouble, but I will say from the very start, before the Dear Colleague letter, when the ARP-HCY original authorized uses information was made available, I have always done 5 nights as a minimum. And a lot of people had said to me when they first heard that, like, you're supposed to only do 3. And I will say that the information that was originally put out by the Department of Ed never said 3 days. It said, for example, a few days. And I decided to interpret that as 5. I let my state coordinator know that that's how I was interpreting it, just so that I was on the up and up. I feel like 5 days as a minimum for us. My staff person and I had made it a priority that we would try to make sure that the program was as compassionate as possible. And so we don't feel like 3 days is really enough to get somebody in, fed, rested, get their like trauma response system calmed down enough to then like access services and get together. So we started with 5 days with an agreement that we would not even reach out to people until the second day, so that they could just do, if they need to spend the first 24 hours sleeping or showering or whatever, like that was sort of the idea that we had behind the 5 days. And then we started allowing extensions of like a second 5 days if people were really close to getting into a shelter or some type of housing program and they just needed a few more days. I decided that even if I got in trouble, like it didn't feel within my personal like values to send somebody back to their car for 3 days when they were about to get into a housing program. So I sort of made some rogue decisions on my own. I'm not advocating that anybody else operate that way, but that's how we handle the length of stay. And then I will also say, we had a significant storm flood event in San Diego County this year in January. It was actually was declared a statewide emergency. A lot of families lost their homes due to flooding from a storm that occurred. And so we experienced a large uptick in families needing hotel stays because of the flooding. So we went from doing like 10 referrals a day to like 30 referrals a day for some of those families. And those families actually stayed in our hotel program for 20 days. Because I had agreed that as long as it didn't go past 28, they could stay while the county of San Diego figured out their program and then they took over those stays, because those people are actually going to be in a hotel for a long time. So that was another like decision I made kind of roguely on my own, but I was a little bit like, you can't, no one's going to come and ask me to kick people out to the streets. So that's how I've handled like the length of stay.
Thanks, Susie. Jen, I'll turn it over to you to talk kind of how your process looks like with the motel stays. And then same question about length of time and how you've navigated it.
Sure. I haven't obviously had as many. The situations that we've had, the people who have required housing, in addition to just the general need for emergency housing, of the families that I work with, I've had unaccompanied youth who left an unsafe situation and were looking to find, a better place to stay. And we did put that student up for, I believe it was 8 nights. And like Susie, I interpreted the, reasonable time frame as needed, right? That was reasonable for that student. And so I had another family who had been in a hotel. They were a self-pay family, so they weren't even on a housing program. And that hotel experienced some water damage. And so the hotel closed down. They weren't on a housing list anywhere because they were self-pay. And so they really didn't have any place to go, and they couldn't afford, they'd already paid for the hotel they were in, right? So they just needed some assistance. So we put them up for, I believe they were 4 nights. So we kind of split the time frame with them. And, I think in terms of finding out what the need was, I work really closely with just about all of our families, or one of our school counselors does, and I work closely with them. So the conversations are really largely between students and their counselors, or, in case of the really little kids, it's a family, being really honest about what's happening. And, I think I loved what Susie was talking about regarding the agreements with hotels and making use of infrastructure that's already there. That's not something that we, to my knowledge, are doing as a state, but I think is really important, because we are all small districts, and in rural Vermont, there aren't hotels in every town. And so to try to kind of get a family moved up in the list of priorities for the existing emergency housing structure that's in place, I think would be a really great benefit. Because really that's all falling to homeless liaisons within school districts that in Vermont wear many hats. I don't think there's a single school district in Vermont that has a dedicated homeless liaison. And so it really, I think, for a state like ours and many other states, I imagine partnering with existing infrastructure would ease the burden significantly and, make that sort of service that we could provide something that is actually, tenable, which I think right now it isn't for a lot of school districts. They just don't take on emergency housing because there's not time to really create a program. So I guess I would say, that's something that, just being part of this, even as a presenter, it's made my wheels spin around how could we do this better to serve students who are really struggling the most and who are suffering the most. So yeah, I think that's my input on that piece of it.
Thank you. Jen, I'll stay with you for the next question. And then Susie, I'll jump over to you for this one too. How do you navigate the transportation piece when you are putting students and families, helping them to find that emergency temporary housing in motels or hotels? Then how do you navigate the transportation of making sure that that's set up for them to get to school?
Well, we have, our district has a taxi service that we've worked with for this population of students for probably over a decade. And so I have a personal relationship with the person who runs that taxi company. She's very responsive. She's very committed to students. That is her only business, is providing student transportation. And so, you know, during COVID and when there were a lot of students in transitional housing, it was difficult to, you know, secure an individual taxi for them. So, you know, it's really just a matter of working with her, and she figures out like, okay, do I have a driver that I could switch over here? And so we just kind of navigate and think, okay, could this student ride with another student? Are there ways we can sort of maximize between towns even? We did have, at one time, we were sharing taxis across district because the need was just significant and we didn't have enough drivers. We've also had generous staff members offer to transport students if they live outside of the district and are coming in, and we've reimbursed them for that portion of their travel from where they've picked up the student. And so it's really on a case-by-case basis, and we try to make it work. You know, sometimes calling the taxi company is the easy solution and it works out, and sometimes it just doesn't. You know, we do have a very, very limited public transport system that goes from our town to one other town. And so, you know, we've made use of that on a couple of occasions, but it just really doesn't work sometimes. And we don't at this point have a contract with any taxi service. It's an agreement on a case-by-case basis. And so we enter into an informal agreement. I do think that that is going to change moving forward because the amount of money that we are paying a single vendor seems like it's drawing some attention. And so we will be entering into a contract with them in the future. But it's really just been as needed and doing whatever is needed. I myself have transported students, you know, so it really just depends. And I think that's the beauty of being in a small district to some extent, is that we really do try to personalize the solution. But it's very time consuming for each student. So, you know, we don't have that equity of scale really to go on. But the bottom line is we do what we can do to make it work for that particular student and family. And because we're small, we kind of have the luxury in some ways of being able to do that.
Thanks, Susie. Same question to you about transportation and how you navigate. And I know you talked about hotels being in the same neighborhood as schools, but just wondering what your experiences are with that transportation piece.
Yeah, we do, or they're close. There isn't a hotel. There's a lot of Motel 6s in San Diego County, but they're definitely not everywhere. And we do have transportation needs that come up frequently. And it is kind of a case-by-case basis depending on what school district we're dealing with. So because we're providing stays for a multitude of different school districts, it really depends. Some districts, it's very hard, like, to say get a student on a bus because it takes like 10 days to set up a new route, and by that time they're probably not going to be at that hotel anymore. There are other districts where they have existing routes, they're smaller, they can get a student like on a school bus pretty quickly, or it's a lot of the same sort of strategies that Jen talked about. We have some families where they have a car and they're driving their student to school, and the district can set up a mileage reimbursement for them for that, or gas cards. We have some districts that use prepaid gas cards. We have some families that are on being provided a bus pass. That's not the best option, but it is an option for some families. And we have a few families that actually appreciate the bus pass because then they have a bus pass for other stuff too that they're trying to do. But we really just work one-on-one with the district, whichever district has the family in the hotel room, as to like what can be provided, and help them. We sort of help them strategize through what the options are that are available to them, and reminding them like what needs to happen on behalf of that family. But also there are quite a few of the motels that we use where there are multiple families in stays at the same hotel, and that starts to make it a little bit easier for the district, because now if they are setting up a route, they're picking up like for 4 or 5 families in one location. So some of that does get easier because when we're serving multiple families, like when we had the flood, we had large numbers of families, like all at the same hotels, all from the same school district. So in that situation, the school district could just like send a bus to pick them all up from the hotels. But aside from that, like we do very similar to what Jen talked about, and just work individually with the district. We have some districts that have transportation companies that they have contracted with. We have some that are very willing to use their school buses. We have other districts that don't even have school buses. So it really just depends on the circumstance.
Could I add one more thing? We also do mileage reimbursement to families, and I love that option for them because it's really the easiest thing as far as a family is concerned. But it becomes really hard to manage on my end because I think it sometimes can lead to information being withheld a little bit about, did I move somewhere else and I'm not telling you? We don't really have a way to verify very well who is living where because we are not setting up the housing. And so that becomes a little bit of a challenge, I think, for our district at times. And so one of the things that we did, and also in Vermont, our state does not allow us to distribute or purchase gift cards to distribute to families with any kind of money, local dollars or grant dollars. So we rely on donations of those things, gas cards in particular. And, so you're sort of at the mercy of what you have on hand. So one of the things that we did is I was able to get access to our corporate account for, we use a particular fuel company for our maintenance vehicles and things like that. So I was able to sort of jump on that bandwagon and have access to a card that I can use to meet someone at a gas station around the corner and fill up their car. It's much cheaper. It's not really sustainable on a large scale, but for a couple of those families that maybe mileage reimbursement doesn't seem like the best idea, that's a way that I've been able to work around that, is by, having them come to me and I provide the gas.
Thank you. Well, we have just a couple of minutes left for your questions. There were some really great questions in the Q&A panel. So I apologize that we can't get to all of them, but we will share contact information after this as well. So please feel free to reach out. But one final question that's come up a number of times, when thinking about kind of that sustainability piece and what will happen to the short-term emergency housing, when ARP-HCY funds are no longer available, what is your plan for that? Kind of what are you thinking about? Is there any way to sustain it? Are there other funding sources? So Susie, I'll start with you for this one.
It's a difficult question because it's such an expensive program to run for me. Like the cost to run it includes like the cost of a staff person in my office, and then the cost of the hotel stays and the number of hotel stays that we've been doing. So I've looked at a couple of different like grant opportunities. There's a very large foundation in San Diego, the San Diego Foundation, that does pretty large grants, but this is, for me, it would be a very large ask to get funding to do this. There are no other funding sources that I receive that have this as an allowable use of funds. And so at this point, what we are looking at is the fact that when the ARP money is finished, that the hotel stay program will sunset, and we won't be able to really do it in another way. It's capacity in my office is also a consideration because it is a lot of work to run this. through like I also sort of use somebody else's business specialist that I don't pay for, but she's kind of helped me out during this just because of all the contracting, all the invoicing back to districts, all of those types of things. So it's a heavy lift to get it done. And I'm just not sure it will sustain once. I'm not 100% signed off on the fact that I'm not going to figure something out. But it's very likely that the program will sunset. If I have funds left over in September, which I honestly don't think I will. And, but if I did with the late liquidation, I could contract them all out to my community partner to run the whole thing possibly. And that way I don't need the capacity and I can have that contract signed by the 30th. So there are some ways that I might be able to like look at doing it. But as of right now, I don't have an answer.
That's okay. Thank you so much for your thoughtfulness and how you're thinking about it. Jen, I will turn it over to you really quick as well for that last question of kind of what's your plan after ARP-HCY?
Sure. I mean, for us, it's really less about the dollars that we are spending on emergency housing because they haven't been significant. It's more about it no longer being an allowable use. And so, you know, we have access to a state grant that I've applied for and gotten money for, but again, it's not something that's included. You know, I also think there are other things within that list of allowable uses from the ARP money that are also going away. And to me, that's the biggest area where I think SchoolHouse Connection and other national agencies can help is by advocating for an expansion of that list of allowable uses. I think it's also important to have advocacy at the federal level for increasing the amount of money going to states. And, you know, even with the existing competitive grant structure that we have in our state, at least the money would be there. The idealist in me longs for a time where these are entitlement grants and not competitive grants. And I'm not sure that we'll get there at the federal level, but you know, those are the sorts of things that I think about because it's not sustainable. It's not sustainable for schools to provide these services to students with, you know, many of the other mandates that are coming to school districts that are not funded. You know, it seems like a misplacement of responsibility in my mind. And so again, it's really less about the money. It's more about where it's coming from and who should be paying for it. So that's not something that little me and little Milton and little Vermont is going to solve, but I really think that's the only way we're going to be able to move forward with any sort of sustainability for this issue.
Well, I want to say thank you both so much for all of this. Again, I apologize that we didn't get to all of the questions, but one of the things that did come up a number of times is asking for copies of your housing questionnaire and your needs assessment. So we will get those from Susie and Jen, and we will make those available if they're willing to share those out. And I do want to also say that we are also advocating very strongly. So exactly what you said, Jen. We are advocating very strongly at SchoolHouse Connection for the continued use of emergency stays or that hotel motel. So just know that that is on our radar. And so before we close, I'm going to hand it back over to Anna Sophia to close us out and to share a couple of additional resources. But thank you again so much, Susie and Jen.
Thank you all so much. I really loved specifically that you all shared a little bit about just kind of the lessons learned, even if there's not funding available, there's a lot that you all have learned and you've all shared with us. So thank you so much. I am going to share my screen again, but it's not letting me do it. I am just going to say really quickly that we are going to be following up with also creating a quick 2-pager just with some considerations. So you all don't have to memorize everything. We do have, we will write all of this up. And then I wanted to just share the link again to the the bit.ly link to the Schoolhouse Connection Slack. So again, if you have any questions, comments for us, we will be checking that Slack for the rest of the day. So just let us know if you have any questions or feedback for us. Okay, I see. Okay, thank you so much for helping out with my slides, but this is our contact information. So Susie, Jen, Anna Sophia, me, and Karen and I are here to support you with any of your questions as well.